know that your small business is possibly eligible for lucrative government contracts? Predictions are out there. We see it. The number of opportunities will rise in the coming weeks and months. It's so good to be back behind the microphones on behalf of everyone here at the show. We hope all is safe and well with you and yours. This is Bill Culhane, the host of The Big Bid Theory, powered by Bid Prime. So far in Season 6, we haven't really focused on specific industries. As a matter of fact, on our last episode, Terry Williams from PTAC down in the Alamo City, San Antonio, shared her insights on how businesses can get help, resources, COVID relief, etc. Later in this episode, we're going to visit with another expert on a specific aspect, program, and government purchasing, specifically covering set-asides for small business and a number of other topics that I trust you're going to find really important, very valuable information. Of the more than $482 billion in contracts for goods and services the federal government awarded, and we're looking at fiscal year 2018, more than $120 billion was awarded to, guess who? Small businesses. You're also likely aware that Congress has an annual government-wide goal of awarding a percentage of prime federal contracts to small businesses. The goal there is to help ensure small businesses receive a share of federal procurement dollars. This is from the Small Business Administration's website. Quote, the federal government's goal is to award at least 5% of all federal contracting dollars to small disadvantaged businesses each year. You'll want to stick around for my conversation with Haley Claxton, more on her in a little bit. But first, we're fortunate to be able to, are still social distancing. Hey, Rick, in your day job, when you aren't helping to make the TBBT magic happen, I know you've researched and come across a number of set-asides targeted helping small business.
Without a doubt, Bill. I know that Haley is going to cover a number of specifics on the process, but on a daily basis, I see where folks in government contracting are leveraging set-asides to help them fulfill their requirements, and, this is important, to make sure they're meeting goals in small business contracting.
Can you put it into perspective? Maybe not exact numbers, but to what degree are you seeing set-asides pop up out there?
Well, I'll say this. The number of opportunities has grown recently, despite some uncertainty on the landscape that we're experiencing. And I think it's just as important to note that the available set-asides are across a wide range of industries. If I search on Bid Prime's database to include any bids that are tagged by any of the various set-aside categories, I can find that the results are across just about every industry category, and there are no particular standout fields that they're focused to.
Thanks, Rick. We'll hear from Rick a little bit later in the always popular Crazy Bid segment. Stick around. We'll bring on our guest. Haley Claxton comes by after this brief message.
The Big Bid Theory is brought to you in part by Bid Prime. Over 11 years in changing the bid services industry, Bid Prime has become the solution for businesses serious about winning public sector business. From the premier technology in the industry to real-time bid notifications, supporting documents, and robust data tools, it's all backed by unmatched personalized customer support. Bid Prime. Start your free zero-obligation trial today. bidprime.com.
From the Sunflower State up in Lawrence, Kansas, Haley Claxton indeed joins us. Currently, Haley is an attorney with Koprince Law up in Lawrence. She practices many legal issues having to do with federal government contracts law. She knows the lay of the land. She's worked in and with federal and state government agencies and others and understands the mechanics of the administrative processes. Haley attended the University of Kansas School of Law. While attending law school, worked as a law clerk to the Library of Congress Office of the General Counsel there in our nation's capital. Haley earned a BA in history from Kansas State University. Is also a major contributor to SmallGovCon. Important information for small business contractors. And you're going to hear me later, it is a treasure trove of very good content. Yes, my friends, Haley is well versed on set-asides and many other topics. Here's my visit with Haley Claxton.
First of all, Haley, we appreciate you taking some time to share your expertise.
I'm happy to, I guess, be with you virtually.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of folks are doing a lot of things virtually right now. I just went through your bio, a little bit of your background. And one of the things that I mentioned, Haley, looking at my notes here, you did your undergrad at Kansas State, law school at Kansas. Now, full disclosure, I have 3 friends who are graduates, and I mean proud graduates of Kansas State. Steve, Cedric, and Mike. A couple of other friends actually coached basketball once upon a time at Kansas State. I know that none of those guys, proud Wildcats, the rivalry is alive and well, none of those guys would ever consider going to the University of Kansas unless they absolutely had to. And I joke to my Jayhawk friends, how did you work through making the move from Manhattan to Lawrence? Are you a Wildcat, a Jayhawk, or a little bit of both?
I like to think of myself as a Wildcat, but now having lived in Lawrence for a while, I have to admit it's growing on me a little bit. Kansas State is my heart and soul, but they didn't have a law school. So when it came time to start applying for law schools, I had to change my colors a little bit. But
got it. Well,
I will say that both schools have definitely served me well.
Well, very good. And that was a very diplomatic response, Haley. Let's roll up our sleeves and get into the topic at hand. I mentioned you work in the quite broad world of administrative processes as it pertains to contracting with federal and state agencies. Can you share a little bit more on what you've done and what you're currently doing in those areas?
Sure. So the firm that I work for, Koprince Law, is actually focused specifically on federal government contracting and even more specifically on what that means for small businesses. So we are a very, I guess you'd call us a boutique law firm. We're incredibly specialized, and I think that gives us a really good idea of what our clients, who are mostly small business contractors, are looking for when they start to perform contracts for the government or as they continue performing contracts for the government.
Perfect. And we will want to hear more about Koprince Law a little bit later in this segment. Of course, we've seen a number of small businesses taking advantage of set-asides. On the ground here in Austin, across the country, a number of small businesses are earning contracts. There are also businesses considering pursuing set-asides. So let's start here, Haley, kind of a 35,000-foot view. How would you describe set-asides to a small business owner who maybe isn't so learned on the subject? And I floated this to you last week as you and I were communicating back and forth. In your opinion, why should small businesses consider going through the required steps in attempting to earn set-asides? Is it worth it?
It is absolutely worth it. What a set-aside means is that you are only competing against other people who meet that set-aside criteria. So say the federal government sets aside a contract for small businesses. The only people that can compete for that procurement are other small businesses. Same goes for set-asides for service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, for women-owned small businesses, and for participants in the 8A program. If it is set aside for that group, you're only competing against, or you should only be competing against other companies that meet the same criteria that you do. So it really narrows down the pool of competition, and that can be a really big boon for anyone who is willing to take the steps to get certified to one of the set-aside programs.
As far as the assistance programs go, Haley, the 8A certification process specifically, what are some of the more important considerations for a small business owner, in your opinion?
So the 8A program, at least in my opinion, is the most difficult of the programs to get certified in. This is because there are a number of very, very specific requirements that create a little bit more wiggle room than some of the other programs. So by comparison to the SBA Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Program, they'll go to the VA to ensure that you are a service disabled veteran. and that status doesn't change. For the 8A program, because it's based on social and economic disadvantage, it's a little bit more specific when it comes to how you meet those requirements, and even in specific cases of what those requirements are and how they apply to your business. So if anyone's interested in pursuing that 8A certification, you got a lot of hoops to jump through. They only approve about 50%, I believe, of the applications that come in. So it really, really pays to do your homework if you're looking into 8A certification. That being said, it is a great opportunity if you can get that certification. Because it's so difficult to get into, I think a lot of businesses are really hesitant to do so. And so, there are fewer 8A certified companies, and so that really narrows down that pool of competition.
That's a very good point, that last point you made, Haley. When you're competing for these contracts, as you pointed out earlier in our conversation, you're competing against other 8A certified businesses. I'm biased, but I know in my world, I see a number of 8A certified businesses that are thriving, largely in part in some cases due to the work that they're doing for the government. We hear it, Haley, and we know it's true. In our last episode, we visited with Terry Williams, and I know you're familiar with PTAC. Well, Terry Williams, of course. Terry Williams is a director of the PTAC office in San Antonio, down the road from us. But getting back to my point, people need help at times. There are a number of assistance programs out there, as we've established, to include the mentor-protégé agreement. What is that? Can you kind of give us the nuts and bolts on that program?
So at their core, a mentor-protégé agreement is a form of agreement between a more experienced contractor, usually a large business, but it doesn't have to be, and just an entity that knows kind of the ropes of federal contracting, at least in the federal sphere, and a smaller, little bit less experienced contractor. So the mentor and the protege. There are a number of different mentor-protege programs in the federal government, but the one that is the most all-encompassing is the all-small mentor-protege program. And it's a good benefit to be a part of that program, because not only is the mentor able to give the protege some assistance in kind of getting their business set up for federal contracting, providing financial assistance in many cases. But if those two entities decide to form a joint venture, that joint venture can utilize the protege's set-aside characteristic. So if you have a large business and a small business that form a mentor-protege agreement, and then they form a joint venture between the two of them, they can use that small business set aside to bid on work.
Certainly an example there of both parties benefiting.
Absolutely.
Clearly, right now, things aren't status quo for some businesses and government agencies as well. Everybody listening to this show, everybody's aware of what's going on. There are agencies operating not just here in Texas, but I'm sure up there in Kansas. There are agencies providing a number of goods, services, and solutions differently than a few months ago. Last week, I watched a number of IT industry leaders in government and education, and these folks were from across the U.S., and those experts discussed the future of government and education, how the landscape is changing, specifically in IT, in government and business and government. There is right now, I think we'd all agree, somewhat of a level of uncertainty, but I see a number of positives over here. The U.S. government remains the number one customer in the world. Governments are still buying. From your chair, your firm works with a number of businesses. What would you say to a small business looking for positives right now, June of 2020?
I think two big positives. One of them you touched on is that the government hasn't stopped buying things. And that means that they haven't stopped buying things from small businesses. So this is a good time if you're looking for, something new to pursue because, your typical commercial lines of business have kind of hit a lull, it's really a good time to look into government contracting because kind of no matter what happens, or at least we hope, the government's not going to stop buying things. And we've definitely seen that happen in this instance. The second positive is that people are talking about small business now. And this isn't just, Congress. This is also, the news is very focused on small business, and there's a national conversation going on. And I think that ultimately is great for small businesses and really good for small business contractors. We know that in the future, although there's been a lot of uncertainty with kind of the first wave of the pandemic, because we really haven't seen anything like that in the recent past. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the federal sphere about how to better utilize small businesses in responding to situations like this as well. So next week, we actually have one of my fellow associates at Koprince, Ian Patterson. He'll be discussing the Defense Production Act, which currently allows the president to basically tap contractors to have some sort of response to any sort of disaster situation. So, for example, in this case, the president used it to have some auto manufacturers start making ventilators and things like that. Mm-hmm. They are discussing how that law can be better used to support small businesses as well as, those large businesses that can quickly turn their production to whatever the need is. So I guess to wrap up that point, Congress is thinking about small businesses and especially how to support them, and especially small business contractors in the case of an emergency like we've encountered.
The pandemic, as you pointed out, Haley, it's opened a lot of eyes, and maybe for those who weren't quite aware, but the importance of small business. I've heard forever, I'm sure you've heard forever, it's a talking point somebody will throw out, small businesses are important. Well, what are we doing in this country to help small businesses? And as you mentioned, I think there's really right now a spotlight on small business. And I'm not suggesting that it's a positive. Of course, we're talking about a pandemic, but each and every analyst I've spoken with, everything that I've seen on this end, COVID-related purchases, for example, are going to increase in Q4, even more so than what we've seen already. And there will be other opportunities out there in the coming months, coming quarters for small businesses. And you pointed a lot of outstanding information out right there. Earlier, I mentioned how small businesses seek help at times. We all do. It's prudent. How does Koprince Law assist small businesses in navigating the certification process and earning some of the set-asides, some of the government contracts you and I have discussed? Sure.
So we typically don't help you work through kind of the checklist of documents you need to produce for any of these certifications. That's something that usually you go to your local PTAC for, but we do help you generate some of those documents. So if you want to make sure that your bylaws meet up with the regulatory requirements, we do a lot of drafting of joint venture agreements, mentor-protégé agreements, and specifically with the 8A program, we also assist with writing a narrative if you're not in one of the designated social disadvantage groups. So we do a lot more with specific issue spotting, but when it comes to sending in your whole application, we don't really do that kind of work. But if there's anything specific that you have questions about or that you are concerned about, we are more than happy to help with those things. We also have a blog and our YouTube channel that are dedicated to putting out information for small business federal contractors. And that's, freely accessible on the internet. We also have a number of handbooks that we've written to help people navigate through those processes. So when I say that we don't necessarily hands-on gather all of the documents and send them in, we do try to set you up for the best chance of success when you do apply for these programs.
I think you're aware of this. I actually took the opportunity in preparation for our conversation I went to some of those resources you mentioned, and they're as good as I've seen. Can you please share some details on how a listener can access some of that information? Is there a phone number? Are there URLs? Anything like that you'd like to share? And by the way, to our audience and our longtime listeners know, the information Haley's about to give can be found in the description of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is SmallGovCon, that's all lowercase, .com. And that's going to be your best source for how to get to any of our other platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. But the blog is really the hub of all of that. You can also find our books there as well and all of our contact information on there. We try to post about once or more per day to provide you information about changes in regulations, cases that have come out, or any other important information for government contractors. So we also try to do that in a way that you can read. We try to avoid lawyer speak, and we really want to try to support small businesses in a way that is readable and understandable.
It's very good. SmallGovCon.com. Any questions about accessing? Any questions about accessing, as I describe it, that treasure trove of information? Go to the description of this episode, and Kevin has a link right there. Well, Haley, on behalf of everybody here in the studio, our audience, thank you. Take care. Be safe. And we hope to speak with you again in the future.
Great. You as well.
My visit with Haley Claxton, and I know I just said it, but for more information on Haley and SmallGovCon, travel to the description of the podcast and you'll be able to find that info. Now it's that time. As always, Rick Jennings, not just our producer, a guy who wears many hats. Of course, Rick also oversees our crazy bids. And with no further ado, here is Rick Jennings with the next installment of Crazy Bids.
Thanks, Bill. And here is everyone's favorite part of the podcast, or so I'm hoping it is, according to my totally unbiased opinion. So this synopsis takes a bit of an unexpected twist, so I'll just read the summary as is. So this bid comes from the beautiful Canadian province of British Columbia. The BC Liquor Distribution Branch is requesting proposals from qualified and experienced companies for an online knowledge provider for the LDB's product education program, specific to beer. So, basically, this RFP is calling for a learned consultant or a company to help them develop an online course for the LDB's employees to become more educated on beer. And apparently, their current course material is very basic, so they're taking the next steps to educate their employees. I'm really curious as to what kind of company could combine their accredited skills in what would be education, software development, and knowledge of beer, and how you would use all of these skills to respond to this RFP. And I'm almost 100% that this will not be the case, but I do have this vision of the class or the consulting session basically to be like sampling all of these different flights of beer and such, just like you would do at a brewery. Probably not going to be that, though. Well, I mean, I would also hope that, I guess this software could probably make it out to us in the public, because I certainly wouldn't mind educating myself on the subject as well. I'd really like to, well, mostly so I can impress others with something a little bit more impressive than being able to tell an ale from an IPA. So if you can combine your company's skills in education, software development, and beer, then, well, first, send me a copy of what you're going to help them implement, and then you can take part in this crazy bid that you can win.
Well, all I can say, Rick, is cheers to that crazy bids. Good work as always. Many thanks to Haley Claxton from Koprince Law and SmallGovCon for her invaluable insights. Go to the description of the podcast for more info about Haley and SmallGovCon. Thank you for tuning in and sharing, downloading, and following our show, The Big Bid Theory. Send me an email to bculhane@bidprime.com. You can follow us on Twitter at The Big Bid Theory. My Twitter handle is contract_hunter. We're also, of course, over on Facebook as well. Powered by Bid Prime. One more time, many thanks to Haley Claxton. Appreciate your contributions as always, Ricky J. Set-asides. Small business owners investigate, find out, learn about set-asides. I'm Bill Culhane. Until next time, go Gunners, Barracudas, Tigers, Bobcats, and Cubs, and all the best in growing your business.
Powered by Bid Prime, we thank you for tuning in to The Big Bid Theory. From Austin, Texas, the show is produced by Bill Culhane and Jim Ward. Producer and engineer is Rick Jennings. Distribution, research, and production assistance by Kevin Henderson. You can find other episodes of the show on platforms such as iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, among others. As always, thank you for downloading and sharing the podcast.
We're having so much fun, so much fun.